I call the member for Fadden.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's with great pleasure that I bring this motion before the House this evening. As by way of history, the Labor government of the 2007 election promised to fix military superannuation. It said that they would address the inequity of the indexation arrangements. So many things were promised in 07, so many things simply not delivered. The Rudd Labor government at the time led the veterans to believe that they would address this glaring inequity, which is the difference between the indexation of military pensions between those of ostensibly an aged pensioner and those of the military superannuant. The Gillard Labor government in the 2010 election was conspicuous in its absence on any military superannuation policy at all. Unlike Labor, the Coalition is now consulted widely. We have listened carefully to the views put forward by veterans, by those who are ex-service, by ex-service organisations and indeed by current serving ADF personnel. Labor has failed its veterans. The Coalition provides them hope. We actually believe in the unique nature of military service. We believe that our service personnel, past and present, after giving so much for their nation, deserve to live out their lives in the knowledge that they have financial security to the maximum degree possible. Indeed, the submission made by the Alliance of Defence Service Organisations to the current Senate Committee on the Coalition's DFRDB bill notes, and I'll quote, "In no other calling, occupation or profession has the state the power to accept or demand the surrender of these rights, universal human rights. The unique nature of military service deserves unique solutions and places a great burden on the government as the employer to ensure that ADF members are looked after both during and after service." The Vietnam Veterans Federation of Australia also noted that ADF members have suffered conditions of service far less favourable than any civilians. They state that the liability for high-risk combat operations, restriction of liberty in a regimented way of life, compulsory long and irregular working hours, compulsory statutory retiring ages well below the community norms, compulsory high standards of fitness, frequent compulsion relocation. If that's not unique, I'm not too sure what is. The submission by the RSL further states that an examination of legislation for the Australian Defence Force shows that in almost all respects the Parliament has been consistent since Federation in regarding the nation's armed forces as a separate and quite distinctly different part of Australian society. The Coalition is committed to the concept of unique nature of military service. We believe it, we've seen it in action, we've experienced it, we're committed to it. And we are also committed to the process of military superannuation reform. That's why the Coalition made a commitment on the 27th of June 2010 to provide fair indexation for Defence Force Retirement and Death Benefit Scheme and the Defence Force Retirement Benefit Scheme, DFRDB and DFRB superannuation pensioners. The Defence Force Retirement and Death Benefits Fair Indexation Bill 2010 was subsequently introduced into the Senate by my colleague Senator Ronaldson on the 18th of November 2010 and backs up and reaffirms and stands as a beacon of the Coalition's commitment to its word, as opposed to the shallow, hollow promise of the Rudd Labor government in 2007. The private members' bill that we submitted to the Senate affirms the Coalition's commitment to introduce a fair, equitable and fiscally responsible military superannuation system. The bill also reaffirms the Coalition's recognition of the unique nature of military service. These changes have long been sought by veterans' organisations as part of that wider, fairer indexation system. The change would bring indexation arrangements for these superannuants into line with the age pension. It's the right thing to do, considering the unique nature and the risks of military service. Widows of superannuants of this scheme will also benefit from the announced changes. The Coalition is simply calling on all senators, all members, who've been vocal measures and supporters of indexation regime to support the motion and indeed support the Coalition's bill. We ask no more than that. We know the Labor Party will be true to their word when they broke it in 2007. We know they treat veterans with great discard and disdain. But those who have stood in this place and said publicly that they will support fair indexation, we simply call on them to honour their word. From 1 July 2011, the Coalition's bill will ensure that DFRDB and DFRB superannuants aged 55 and over will have their superannuation pensions indexed in the same way as Australian government income support pensions. Twice yearly, pensions will be indexed to the higher of the CPI, the male total average weekly earnings, or the pensioner beneficiary living cost index. Currently, DFRDB and DFRB members have their superannuation indexed only in line with CPI. This bill will provide over 56,000 retired Australian Defence Force personnel who are members of these now closed DFRDB and DFRB schemes with an indexed superannuation pension that better reflects changes in the cost of living. A Senate committee report, the 9th such report into the indexation arrangements. Of the 17 submissions recently received by the Senate committee, only 2 didn't support the bill. And the 2 that didn't, surprise, surprise, were Labor's Department of Finance and Deregulation and, of course, the Department of Defence. Every other veteran and ex-service organisation unanimously supported the Coalition's bill. Seems like the whole nation is on board, except the Australian Labor Party. All submissions contended, or all ESO submissions, that military service is sufficiently unique that those serving should be entitled to special financial and non-financial benefits, and that a fair indexation regime would satisfy this objective. I agree. The Coalition passionately agrees. The 2 submissions that didn't support the Coalition's bill reached different conclusions on our bill. Each reached a different conclusion regarding the scope of the bill. In their respective submissions, each of the departments differently and selectively quoted advice from the Australian Government Actuary with regards to how provisions in the bill will apply to DFRDB and DFRB members. For instance, the Department of Defence, submission number 15, said that on the 13th of January 2011, the Actuary provided Defence with an analysis of the increased costs involved in changing from current indexation by CPI to the methodology proposed in the bill. The analysis indicated that the bill, as drafted and amended, does not deliver indexation for the best of CPI, male total average weekly earnings, or the pensioner and beneficiary cost living index. It falls short of that objective. Yet the Department of Finance and Deregulation says, however, as reflected in the AGA's advice to the Department of Defence, it appears that the bill would provide for better indexation arrangements than those currently applied to the age pension. Defence says it wouldn't help. Finance and Deregulation says it would help. I suggest their responses were rushed. Clearly, they didn't look at the content of the private members' bill, and they both came to vastly different conclusions. The Coalition believes, as we took to the election, this would cost $98 million over the forward estimates. Even if we were to believe the government that it would cost $175 million over the forward estimates, this is easily funded by reducing the growth of the Australian Public Service full-time equivalents in the Department of Defence, including DMO, by 33%. If we simply reduce the growth by 33% over the forward estimates, it would save well over $175 million, able to fund the requirement. And this will still see the number of staff in the department grow in size by a staggering 8.3% by financial year 13-14 compared to a budgeted 12.6%. 8.3% I still find a staggering growth for APS civilian bureaucracy, but cutting it from 12.6 to 8.3 easily funds the Coalition requirements. The Coalition believes that the government has not justified the expansive growth in the civilian defence bureaucracy. The budget forecast to grow by 12.6% over the forward estimates simply is indefensible. This growth is also taking place at the same time the government's strategic reform program is designed to reduce expenditure by approximately $2 billion per annum over 10 years. Accordingly, it's fitting that a savings measure to provide a more equitable indexation regime for retired defence personnel should be funded from the Department of Defence. The private members' bill is quite simple. We stand for fairer indexation for those who have served our country as recognition of their unique service. The question is, what will Labor and the Independents do?